But if I look back on my life, I would say that mostly I've fallen into books. They've taken me by surprise.
How do you know you have a book idea worth writing?
How do I know I have a book idea worth writing? Well, I must start by confessing that I've thought I've had a book idea worth writing many, many more times than I've been right about that. And my hard drive is filled with whole and half projects and books that I thought would sell and couldn't sell. I don't care about that. I don't ever imagine writing to be particularly efficient for me. I write 10 times more than I sell, and I think that's a friendly estimate. But your question's a good one. It's something that I'm thinking about now because I'm currently between books, and I'm asking myself, what do I think I would like my next book to be about? Here's the idea that I'm testing. I can't remember exactly what I'm calling it. It's called To Live Outside the Law. And it examines the question, how do people behave? What happens at the border between order and outlaw? And why do people go to those places and how do they act? And some of the things that I'm thinking about are, there were gambling ships outside the 3-mile limit off in Santa Monica Harbor at one point. They needed to get outside the law in order to operate effectively. Also, there are churches and cults who separate themselves from physical space, from authority, from organized authority, for freedom. We also note that places like Provincetown and Key West tend to accumulate freaks because freaks move farther and farther away until they reach a point where they can't move away anymore, and that's where they settle, at the end of the line. So we can find a certain type of mindset at the end of the line. And I'm interested in that, and I have in mind to do a series of vignettes on this. How will I know it will sustain as a book? I'll test it to a certain extent. I'll drill some sample wells, one might say. I'll write about one or two of these topics and see if they're interesting to me. I'll share them with other people. Is this something you'd read a whole book's worth on? I might whip up inquiries and send them around, see if there's something on the level of the pitch that people respond to. But if I look back on my life, I would say that mostly I've fallen into books. They've taken me by surprise. I might find myself musing on a book and then one day I just start writing it. That seems to work for me. A lot of people want to analyze the marketplace, which is the way to go, figure out what people are buying and write stuff like that. If that's how they plan to dock with the spaceship, the space station, that might work. At a certain point in my life, I wrote a series of novels based on the understanding that in writing this one novel, I slayed an old ghost. I dealt with something in my past that I really wanted to deal with. So I wrote the next novel by picking something else from my past that I really wanted to deal with, just for the intent of writing it and seeing if I could explore it enough to get past whatever it was that was bugging me.
And you could always go Hunter S. Thompson if you wanted to sort of see people on the fringes, hang out in bars,
Sure.
Take public transportation. You'll be surprised at the different stories you hear from people. You're waiting for a bus.
I think it's a given that we won't know if the book is going to work until we write it. But we also know that there are some books that we don't have information authority over, and we're not going to get that information authority without a whole lot of research or life experience that we don't necessarily want to do or have. I'll give you an example. I've always wanted to write a book about a certain incident in medieval history. I won't tell you what it was, it doesn't really matter. But I know that I'm not interested in doing the research that would make me enough of an authority to write with authority on the subject. I think a lot of people who set out to write novels, in particular first novels, don't have information authority and use derived information authority. That is to say, they base their work on everything they've read in other people's works. They write novels like they think novels are supposed to be written, rather than writing novels that come from their own lived experience and their true voice. Let's see if I can connect the dots here. Somebody might say, I know that romance novels are selling, and here's a book that tells me how to write a romance novel. And if I follow the steps in this book on how to write a romance novel, I will succeed in writing a romance novel that I can sell. That might be true. But it might also be that the construction is so lifeless and so derivative of everything you've learned about writing romance novels that it just doesn't work at all. We won't know until we test your capacity as a writer. And every time you write a novel, whether it succeeds or fails, you do two things. One, you test your capacity as a writer. Two, you advance your capacity as a writer. That's why we undertake the task.
Sure, and nowadays we can just type in anything and get a video to come back on someone that really is in that situation. We don't really have to go out and experience it and, you know.
That's another real interesting point. A lot of what creative expression is about, historically, is overcoming limitations of technology. Let's take an old example. Cave drawings. What is the technology for creative expression? It's ink made out of red clay and a stick and a cave wall. That's a pretty primitive technology, and the best they could do was a stick figure representation of people and animals. But they put it in a safe place. 10,000 years later, some of that art still exists. So you can't say they failed. They made the best of the situation. They did the best they could with available technology. The world we live in now offers so many ways to experience reasonable versions of reality, simulations of reality, that the technical gap between real reality and imagined reality is getting smaller and smaller. Think about the phrase virtual reality. If you put on a VR goggle and let your mind go to it, you're in an altered reality. You don't need to write a story of that altered reality in order to imagine what it's like if you can have the real simulated experience of what it's like, which will have profound changes to the way we think about story and how we think about film and television and how we think about art. Because technology is inescapable. Art will absorb technology. It never turns its back on it. It might decide not to use it situationally, but it always takes new technologies in. This is why we have acrylic paints and not just oil paints.
If you are interested in storytelling, you may also like our new book, Story Questions, the sponsor of today's video. It's a story tool that offers you over 1,500 story questions that you can use as story prompts. It's packed with over 40 categories, so whether you are in the brainstorming stages, developing characters, dialogue, or rewriting, it can help you at every stage of the writing process. Think about this statement. Most powerful stories are just great answers to strong questions. We've linked up to story questions in the information section below. Now back to the interview. You'd said that you had been told and been tested that you were, high IQ since you were a child. Mm-hmm. Did you get this compartmentalization because you were in class and you were bored and you always knew, like you had one sort of eye on the blackboard and then the other eye was over here, or I don't know?
Oh, absolutely, okay. absolutely. And I was recognized as such. Teachers in classrooms would say, Johnny would do better if he paid more attention. But, you couldn't map it against my grades because the grades are all great. Why? Not because I'm brilliant, but because I am programmed to achieve academically. My brother and sister and I all were. My parents were very gentle people. It's not like they were scaring us, but they did create the expectation. One thing you can do with your Vorhaus brain is get good grades in school. Please go do that. And I used the phrase Vorhaus brain just now. I consider it a gift. We Vorhauses as a group, as a family, we got pretty good brains. Can't hit a jump shot, can't run very fast, are not tall, don't have hair, some of us. Got good brains. It makes a difference. The compartmentalization has its roots in that because certainly that was where I learned how to think and how to learn and how much extra bandwidth I had. Case in point, when I was in college, I took a degree in creative writing, and a lot of the classes were just discussions. Somebody would read a story and we'd talk about it. Well, I could not stay engaged, and I was just so bored. I would try to write letters, but they were too distracting. If I'm writing, I'm not paying attention. That didn't work. I tried to pay attention and inevitably fell asleep, so that didn't work. I took up embroidery. I literally started bringing embroidery projects to class. I'm a 21-year-old kid, 20-year-old kid in Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh in the late 1970s, sitting in a classroom doing embroidery. And every now and then a professor would say, "Don't you think that's kind of rude?" And I'll say, "I think snoring would be ruder. And if I don't have this to occupy my hands while I give you all of my attention with my ears, I'm going to fall asleep." And they bought it.
Well, aren't you using a different part of your brain, though,
Sure.
to do it?
Yes, but a complementary part of the brain. Let's break it down. If I'm trying to write a letter and pay attention in class at the same time, I'm trying to use the language center of my brain to do two different things at the same time. And I know this doesn't work. Like today, I know it doesn't work. If I were listening to a podcast and texting at the same time, I couldn't hear what's in the podcast. I can only focus on what I'm texting. I lose it. You do it too. It's very common. We stop paying attention when we start writing, so that doesn't work. The embroidery, that's a repetition task. It's poke the needle here, pull the needle out, poke the needle here, pull the needle out. So it's motor control. It's the brain doing motor, eye-hand coordination, motor control tasks. But the whole language center of the brain is not occupied in any sense. This was the problem. If all I'm doing is listening, language center of the brain is having a party, but nobody else is invited. If I'm doing embroidery while I'm listening, then more parts of my brain are engaged and I feel better. Who doesn't watch TV while fixing dinner or listen to a podcast while doing a jigsaw puzzle? But I can't listen to a podcast and do a crossword puzzle because the crossword puzzle is language. That podcast is language. I can't do both those things at the same time. I can do a jigsaw puzzle, listen to a podcast, and sometimes I do that just to recharge my batteries. Sorry, I'm admonishing myself because I'm not telling the complete truth. I'm currently doing a jigsaw puzzle because my wife bought me one for Christmas, and she thought it was a good idea. I was completely opposed to it. I said to myself, I'm not the sort of person who does jigsaw puzzles. That's just, to me, it's a waste of time. But she sweetened the pot by giving me a jigsaw puzzle made from one of my own works of art.
Oh, great.
Oh, how can I not do
Wow.
as I have to rise to that challenge. And because I'm willing to say to myself, okay, you're just being hard-nosed, try to be a little bit more accepting. Let's try it and see what I get out of this experience of doing a jigsaw puzzle. It's got its value. It takes my brain to a different place. I'm not having a terrible time when I'm doing a jigsaw puzzle. I think mostly it's the should voice in my head that's saying, this is in no way as productive as you could be. You should be writing a novel. So what we arrive at, damn it, no matter how enlightened you are and how well you think you have the problem solved, there's an infinity of unenlightened hovering over your head. There's an infinite gap between the person you are and the person you want to be. And the job of closing that gap requires some vigilance. For me, this means somebody comes along and says, you might get some value out of doing a jigsaw puzzle. And I say to myself, no, I don't do those. Those aren't for me. I'm getting in the way of my own enlightenment. I say to myself, well, all right, I haven't done a jigsaw puzzle since I was a kid. Maybe I'm outdated. Let's try it and see. If I do it and want to do another one, I'll do another one. If I do it and don't want to do another one, I won't do another one. But in this moment, I'm reminding myself, this very gap that I'm talking about, the gap between what we seek to achieve and what we actually achieve, what we seek to live up to and what we actually live up to, what beliefs we seek to have, what actions we seek to have, and the ones we actually end up with, the gap is as wide for me as it is wide for everyone. And the gap is always infinite and yet measurable and closable, weirdly. We're never going to close the gap, but we can always take action toward closing the gap. We can't close it completely, but we can make it smaller.